Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here today. I will be waiting a minute until you are entering into this alumni career conversation today. We'll give it a minute or two here. We're so happy that you're here joining us today. At the beginning of December, hope you have a hot cup of coffee or tea or hot chocolate. You're just cozied on up, ready to listen to these three amazing alums from liberal arts and their career journeys for the topic today, which is careers in museums. So we're very fortunate to have alumni join us and volunteer their time and share their stories. And it can be really helpful to learn about what they did when they were at Penn State, how they got to where they are, and maybe any tips that they have for you as students with volunteering or part-time jobs or internships or even classes to consider that they really liked when they were at Penn State. So we're very thankful they're joining us. They have a variety of a large variety of experience and background, and I'm really amazed and thankful that we're here with them today. Danielle Liddick is a career coach in our office. She will be moderating the Q&A. We want you to ask questions. This is a panel for you students, so we want you to be able to ask questions directly to these alums in your career area of interest. So please feel free to post the questions in there. I will start off with some questions to get started, and then we will go from there. So thank you again. This is a topic that we get a lot of interest in our office as career coaches, talking to students that are interested in history in the museum field and in everything, all in the above. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read their bios, the alumni that are here, quickly so that we can get going and hear from them, but just give you a little bit of background of who they are and how they got to where they are. So we're going to start off with Ken Hickman. Ken presently serves as the Department Chair for Education and Exhibits at the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center, the U.S. Army War College in Carlisle, PA. Prior to this, he held positions of Deputy Director at the National Coast Guard Museum in Washington, D.C., and Director of the Penn State All Sports Museum here in University Park, PA. During his time with the latter, he led the organization through unprecedented growth and garnered multiple state-level awards. Earlier positions include time with the USS Constellation Museum in Baltimore, Maryland, and the American Merchant Marine Museum in Kingsport, New York. He has served on the board of the Small Museum Association and committees of the American Alliance of Museums and American Association for State and Local History. A published historian, Ken has overseen all military history content development for About.com and ThoughtCode.com for 13 years and has appeared on multiple History Channel programs. He holds degrees from the Pennsylvania State University, Bachelor of Arts in Liberal Arts, 1998, the University of Delaware with a master's degree in 2000, and Drexel University MLIS degree in 2014. I have worked with Ken here at Penn State. We are colleagues from the past, and it is very nice to see you and have you here today. Welcome, Ken.
Certainly good to see you too, Dana.
Thank you. Next, we have Casey Sennett. For those of you that may have been walking in the hallway here, you may see her picture in the hallway in Liberal Arts in Sparks Building. But Casey graduated from Penn State in May of 2023 with a master's degree in anthropology and bachelor's degrees in anthropology, history, Jewish studies, and Middle East studies with a certificate in museum studies. Wow. While at Penn State, Casey interned with the Tennessee Holocaust Commission, the Jewish Capitol Museum, the National Museum of the American Sailor, the Jewish Cultural Historical Museum in Curacao, and the Center County Planning and Community Development Office. Casey spent the past year working in public relations and digital media at the Neuengamme concentration camp memorial in Hamburg, Germany. Casey currently works as a library services associate at the Pennsylvania Center for the Book here in State College. Welcome, Casey. And Casey also worked in our office in the Career Enrichment Network as a student. We're happy to have you here.
Hi, thank you, everyone. I'm glad to be here this afternoon.
Thank you. And Joseph Ferguson is an alumnus of the Penn State College Liberal Arts in 2022. Joe earned a Bachelor of Arts in History and a minor in Art History and was a member of the Penn State Blue Band, and the Phi Alpha Theta National History Honor Society during his time here at Penn State. He started as a curatorial and preparation intern at the Palmer Museum of Art in the summer of 2021, and he has continued to work there as part-time and then eventually full-time as assistant preparator at the Palmer Museum of Art, which recently opened this summer, and hopefully you've been over there. So we'll hear from Joe about that. Joe has helped to facilitate the move and reinstallation of the museum's collection to the brand new building that opened this past June, and he has assisted in the installation of several exhibitions in both the old and new iterations of the Palmer. In his free time, Joseph enjoys painting and making music. And it's very nice to have you here with us today, Joe. Thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
All right, so getting started again, please feel free to put questions in the Q&A, anything you want to ask. But to get started, let's start off with students are very interested in working in the museum field. What is your advice for them on making this a career? Ken, would you like to start off?
I certainly can. Yeah, it's in terms of getting started, it's the first bits of advice are probably pretty common sense, at this stage of the game. It's a matter of doing internships where you can, and I'm afraid the museum feels probably lagging a bit behind in terms of offering paying internships. That is something that has been discussed frequently in recent years. We're looking at finding creative ways to do that. Where I am down in Carlisle right now, but it's I will admit, just as kind of the circle of career, I interned at the U.S. Army Military History Institute in Carlisle when I was an undergrad, which is now has evolved into the organization I now work for. It was a circuitous route back, but it's given me a greater degree of insight, into the organization. But more to the starting out, it's the connections I made interning as an undergrad and later in grad school were the folks who helped me get the first job, helped me with with networking. Again, probably a cliche thing to hammer, but it is important, particularly in this field. I've long said, if you can't get across country in 3 connections in the museum world, you're not doing it right. So it's the other piece, and it's you can have maybe a little bit of debate around it, is get ready for grad school. It's effectively going to be unavoidable. I will be very blunt. I have not hired a single person in probably the last 15 to 18 years who has not had a master's degree. And that includes for low-level GS7 positions in the federal government. A couple different approaches, to how you want to do that. A couple different degree paths, certificate paths, out there. But I think without diving into that, I'll hand the baton off, and we can circle back.
Casey, do you want to go?
Yeah, I think going off of what Ken was saying is I think it's so important to get internships and especially make those connections. And I think especially using your network here within Penn State and beyond. So an example that I had is one of my internships that I did was with the National Museum of the American Sailor, which was during the COVID-19 pandemic. So there was already a little bit of a benefit of being able to do it virtually. But I actually got the internship because I went to one of the career conversations about wanting to work in a museum, and I did an informational interview with one of the panelists who was an archivist at the museum, but I was more interested in the educational part of museum studies, and she actually was able to give me the email of one of her colleagues who then spoke with me too. So I think it's also really important to be able to use such a wide Penn State alumni network that we have throughout the country and in different museums. That was really critical for me, as maybe I didn't necessarily want to be an archivist, but I was able to get her story and background, but then she was also able to connect me with others. So I think, definitely reaching out to alums, not necessarily just within this panel, but I think also just looking at LinkedIn. If there's a particular museum you're interested in, see if there's any Penn State alums there or someone that you have a connection with, and just sit down with an informational interview. And, they might be able to tell you at least some information kind of about how they got there. And I think that's a really great start as well.
Awesome. Ken, do you want to interject before Joe goes?
Yeah, I just want to add, when we're talking about networking and connections, Casey, hearing you talk about American Sailor, I've known Jen Searcy out there probably for 8, 10 years. So it's a small world, just in terms of getting to know everyone, and, building, your own reputation.
Awesome. There's already a connection. Okay, Joe, what is your advice for students?
So, definitely agree with everything that Casey and Ken have been saying. And, especially from my experience, I probably wouldn't have ended up in this field if I didn't, take that internship that I had my junior year. And that's one of the, real benefits as a Penn State student is just the amount of internships that specifically just even the Palmer itself offers. And I think, since I was first an intern in 2021, they've kind of only expanded their internship program with, a bunch of different options. And I think the one thing that I realized when I started my internship, and I think would help other people who are maybe considering it, is to, there are there's a lot of different positions in a museum that you might not have really thought would be, a job in a museum. Or, I just remember I was so surprised seeing everything that goes on behind the scenes of a museum to make it run. And, different things from, visitor services to education to, specific things with like curatorial stuff. And I think, the internship here at the Palmer has really, it does a really good job of getting you to see a lot of the different aspects of a museum, especially because we are a smaller museum. So you end up, doing a lot more things. And we've had a lot of interns who have come back like another semester and they'll do a different internship there and, get a lot of experience under their belt. So I think just, opening your eyes to seeing, maybe something you didn't think you would want to do or you weren't sure would even be an option, but there's a lot of other options that you can do within a museum.
That's great. I love to hear that. And yeah, it's things that you don't even think about. It's almost like a whole operation within itself, from probably even human resources and financial and that whole end of it too, as well. What liberal arts skills do you find that are most valuable to you in your career, or top skills that are needed in your role? Casey, do you want to take that one to start?
Yeah, I was going to say there are so many skills, and that's one of the benefits too of also having a liberal arts degree, where I know sometimes it can be a little bit nerve-wracking. I remember my parents always saying, "Yes, you have several degrees, Casey, but what exactly do you do with an anthropology degree?" But you build so many soft skills and also hard skills within your discipline as well. And I think some of the most important for me have been just having communication skills, problem solving, and critical thinking skills. So in my bio, it was mentioned last year, I was actually working in Germany for a year and I was doing digital curation and also translating for the memorial. And that's something as well. I was also very much kind of within a different cultural environment and workplace as well, which that was a challenge that, I think transitioning also from graduating into a new profession can be difficult, but there were also some added barriers as well. But my liberal arts degree really helped me with that, being able to communicate, no matter if maybe there were language barriers or even cultural barriers between some of the things that we were doing, that really made me kind of critically think and being aware of what was going on, that those were skills that were very critical for my success being there. And then I've also been able to transfer them back to my work here in State College as well.
Love it. Transferable skills. We talk about that a lot. Yes. Joe or Ken, you want to interject there? Skills that are important.
Yeah, it's, I would say, Casey's hit on the big ones. It's, what is really needed is the ability to communicate effectively, creatively problem solve, and particularly on the communication side is, um, not just be able to write clearly, but write clearly and effectively for different audiences. It's, what goes up on the wall generally needs, in a history heritage situation, usually needs to be written to about a sixth or eighth grade level. So it's, writing like you're writing your dissertation is not what you want to put up up in an exhibit. Excuse me. That needs to be accessible to the widest possible audience. So being able to fine tailor those skills. And um, the other one is, and it's not so much a liberal arts one, is simply to be flexible. Joe was mentioning the opportunity to do a lot of different things within the museum environment. Um, about 80% of American museums have a staff of 3 or less. Which means, starting out particularly at, so, any site in that 80%, be ready to do everything in a given day, from writing, from exhibit work to development to unclogging a toilet. Why we used to joke, how small your site is based on the amount of plumbing you do in a given day. But it's, yeah, it's communicating and, solving problems and being flexible.
Love it. Anything else to add, Joe, or you want to move?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with, everything that Casey and Ken were saying. And, it was a little, took a little bit getting used to for me, just at least, when I started with my position, it's a lot more hands-on stuff, like working in a wood shop and, like being able to, taking measurements, hanging up artwork and, a lot of physical things. So it was a little different than necessarily what I was studying with history, but definitely, the critical thinking skills, the ability to communicate and work as a team together to get things done, and, problem solving skills, trying to figure out how to do certain things has, definitely come in handy and helped me so much through my job. And then also just, my history background, but also, my art history background that I had just gives you, at least in my position, working with artworks a lot, can help you recognize certain artworks if you're discussing them with people. Like it, just having a little bit even of that kind of background has definitely helped with me. Just, knowing our collection, knowing certain things, certain um, types of artworks and, ways to care for them and things like that. So, definitely the critical thinking and just being able to work as a team and, problem solving are probably the biggest ones, but definitely some of that just history and art history knowledge has definitely been helpful as well.
Love it. I love it. Just from all your different perspectives, the critical thinking skills, the writing and speaking and communication and languages. This is things that we talk about with students, really getting out there, showing up at events, being involved in student organizations, outside the classroom experiences, maybe education abroad or embedded programs, all good ways to further develop these transferable skills. We do have a couple questions in the Q&A, so please keep posting there. We'll get to the first one here. So the question is, in terms of working in translation, are there languages that are preferred?
I can take that one. So I think my experience is a little bit specific to working in Germany, and also the memorial that I was working at. So kind of the translating I was doing was mainly into English, but I know the exhibition that I was working with, generally all of the exhibitions were in German, English, Russian, and French, but generally that had to do with the former prisoner population. So especially at concentration camp memorials throughout Germany as well as Europe in general. A lot of them really do try to have translations to the people that were most affected by it, or families that are maybe visiting from some of the countries that people either moved to or persecuted people came from. So those were generally the languages that were mainly used. However, I think if you're kind of looking to be able to have translation as a skill, because I think that's very critical working in museums, whether you're able to do guiding in different languages, whether you're able to help with translations in exhibitions, I think that's kind of a great skill to have. So I think it really depends maybe on the area. So if you're interested in working in the US or maybe Even like in the Southwest, I think Spanish is very beneficial to have, but I think it really depends kind of the content of what museum or topic you're working with, and also the population within the area too, of maybe what language would be the most beneficial. So mine's very specific for the topic and kind of the area I was. So I would definitely have that into consideration, but I think languages are very important. And I know I also was able to give tours in English as well. They loved putting me, because as a native English speaker, they're like, you can take all the Americans especially. So, you know, that can definitely have a leg up, as well as being able to do some of that cross work too.
I love that, Nan. Casey, anything to add? No? Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Thank you, Casey. Would you recommend going into graduate school immediately after undergrad, or is it more worth it to get into the field for work beforehand?
Yeah, I'll jump on that, Dana. I would recommend you go straight away. You will build the connections to launch your career while you're in grad school and with your graduate internship. Odds are that you're likely not going to find anything where you're going to be able to really do meaningful museum work coming out. At least do that work at a wage you can live on. So it's, I always used to sit down with students, when I worked for the university, and we would talk about different grad school paths. You can go straight for a museum studies master's. I usually would tell students at that point, if that's what you're looking at, are you absolutely positively sure that this is what you want to do? Because that degree is not terribly transferable to other industries. There are other programs, such as Delaware, where you will do a master's in a discipline and pick up museum studies as a certificate on the side. Gives you a great deal more flexibility. Obviously, like my master's from Delaware, is in history. I was in the museum program with, everyone from art history, geology to MBAs. So we had the ability to transition to a different career if we needed to. The upside to that is when you're in a department, like I was with the history department. I worked as a TA. The history department picked up my tuition. I was on a stipend. My debt from Delaware, it was very low coming out. Conversely, a certificate program isn't necessarily going to give you all the skills that you need that you would get doing the full degree. So there's a plus or minus that goes with that. And Dana, you might cover your ears for this one. I would recommend all of the undergrads who still have enough time left, go do a business minor. It's like, I know, like we're in this because we don't want to do business stuff, but it is utterly unavoidable. As you go up the ladder, you will need those skills. You will need to be able to do a budget. You will need to be able to do spreadsheets. Most high-level museum work is effectively doing business. You will promote yourself out of doing the fun stuff, unfortunately. You still get to be in that world. But I will tell you that when I was with Coast Guard, the last couple of years, I looked at exhibit drawings. I signed off on things, but I spent most of my day negotiating leases, talking about this, building permits and construction licenses and fun things like that.
That's a great point. We do hear that from a lot of people of how important business skills are. And there is a minor in liberal arts business with a liberal arts minor, and there's also a SMEAL certificate for business, which I think is less credits than a minor, but a lot of times students will do that as well.
No, that is actually wonderful. It's wonderful to hear all the things that exist now that didn't almost 30 years ago, as I realize that I am very much the old man in the room. But no, I always recommend to jump on grad school. If you're going to do it, do it right away. You're already in an academic state of mind coming out of undergrad. And, I used to joke, if you're used to eating ramen now, you can eat ramen for 2 more years.
Awesome. Anything else to add to that? You want to go to the next one in the chat? All right. So tell us about a favorite object you've worked with in the museum or museums where you've worked.
I think I can do one for this. I mean, I guess this is probably one of my favorites. It's kind of hard for me to pick a favorite of the ones that we've worked with, but it was when I started as an intern. I think it was like my first day in, and they were just kind of showing me around and showing me certain things, and I think I got to like, help them move and hold this like, I think it was like a 3,000-year-old like Chinese vase or something. And then, so probably that, but then also they showed me like a print that they had that they were framing of, I forget, I think it was a print of Saint Jerome by Albrecht Dürer. And I was, I was still in school and studying Albrecht Dürer, and he was like, one of my favorite artists to learn about. So that was just the second I saw that, I was like, okay, I really want to, keep doing this internship, and I'm really interested in working here. So, I think those might have been, I don't know if they're my favorites in the museum, but seeing those definitely made me want to keep working there.
Very cool. Thank you. Casey or Ken, anything to add?
I guess an object that I didn't so much as necessarily hold it. It was usually a photo at the end of the tours that I would give at the memorial. But one of the most powerful objects that we would usually tie into tours at the very end was one of the former prisoners at Neuengamme. He was in prison there for about 3 years, and he actually kind of resisted against the SS by being told to kill 14 Soviet prisoners of war. I'm sorry that this is a really depressing story, but unfortunately most of them are. Um, but he chose to defy the SS by not killing them, and he was punished and put in the isolation bunker, but he miraculously wasn't killed. But the Soviet prisoners of war actually had found out that they were saved because he had chose not to kill them by injection. And so they actually smuggled in wood and carved this heart for him, and in Cyrillic had like inscribed to Fritz like our friend. And Fritz was able to have it, and he was later transferred to another camp and brought it with him. But along one of the routes that they would take to their camp deployment every day, there were some little kids that used to leave out food for them because they knew they were prisoners and were undernourished. And one day, to thank them, he actually left his heart on the side of the road for the kids. And Fritz ended up surviving his imprisonment, and he went on to talk for decades about his experience. But it wasn't until the 90s that he was actually giving a talk in the area that he was a former prisoner in. And there was actually a man that came up to him after his talk and said, "I know you. I was one of those little boys." And the little boy had actually taken his heart and kept it all those years and was like, "I want to give it back to you. Like, this is yours." So Fritz it was reunited with it. He lost it probably in 44 or 45. And in the 90s, he got it back. And then he actually donated it to the memorial in the early 2000s. And I would say that's also one of the most beloved items in our collection as well, because it's also able to show, I mean, so many horrific atrocities that happen, but also the power behind it too, of the kindness of people, and then also how this artifact miraculously survived from the hand of the person that possessed it, and then the boy that kept it and returned it to him. So that was always one that sometimes too, like on tours, like people would get really emotional at the end with that. And that was one that was really powerful. And also just seeing it in our display too, because it was a very specific section, was just one that like, it always made me not feel better necessarily, but it definitely made me feel a bit more uplifted sometime with the content we were dealing with. So that was a really powerful object that I really liked talking about and working with.
And I love to hear that because, again, this is why we want students to find a career that they're passionate about, they love, they're interested in, because, that was a experience that you had on your job, at your job, and it touched you. And what an impactful experience. Ken, anything to add? Is he frozen there for a minute, maybe? Okay. We'll move on to the next one. We can always go back if he has one. Here's another question. Can you still move into museum career if you get graduate degrees in archaeology?
I would say I can't say as much that you would necessarily be kind of out of contention after you get a graduate degree in archaeology. I do know as graduating with anthropology degrees, I don't know if you're knowledgeable or you're involved at all with the American Anthropological Association, AAA. They actually have within it a subsect that is the Council for Museum Anthropology. So I would say, even if you're kind of considering more of the archaeology or anthropology route, that there is still ways to be involved, that you can still kind of work within the museum field. Because especially if you want to work in curation, I know especially PhDs in anthropology can be very helpful. Or also working with certain collections that maybe deal with natural history, cultural objects, or like kind of folk, quote unquote, folk history as well. Those are really beneficial with having some of those backgrounds. That I would say that it doesn't necessarily mean that you can never work into a museum, but I think it also depends within your studies as well. Are you taking some museum classes? Are you doing internships? Are you having some of these connections? That I think that's the most critical to make sure that you're still being involved with the field. I think that's really the most important part. I don't think it means that you can't work in the field.
Joe, anything to add from your end? What you see maybe at Palmer?
Yeah, I don't know how much I can really say about, if any limitations that you would have, getting graduate degrees in archaeology, but I definitely agree with what Casey was saying. I think, having experience in museums as well, and then also, getting higher degrees in that would probably help you more on the curatorial side. And then also, if you were in like a natural history museum or, cultural museums like that, I think a degree in that would definitely help.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next one. Can you talk more about what it means to be an archivist in a museum? Can anybody talk about that?
Yeah, it's that's a somewhat broad question. And if you have a specific interest in archives, there's actually some flexibility with that between the museum and the library world. If for those who say want to work at National Archives or in a more archival world, where you are dealing with official records, photography, can be some mixed media film as well. Um, the best way to approach that, obviously, plenty of places to look at for internships, including University Archives there on campus. It's part of the special collections there in Paterno Library. Um, but the best path into that is actually not a museum studies degree, but would be a master's in library science or library and information science. Um, yeah, it's when I interned, with the Army as an undergrad, I actually worked on the photo archival side. So we were specifically dealing with, um, oh, I think we had something like 1.2 million photos back then, in Carlisle. I was specifically working on the Civil War collection down there, but a lot of sorting. I will admit, back then I was writing out catalog cards. They had just gotten a computer collections management system. It took 6 minutes to scan a photo back then. Um, but you know it's a fun area to be in if you like seeing, kind of having hands-on, that type of material that is coming in. I would also add on the archival side, if you can develop an expertise and specialty for digital born material and electronic records, there is a massive, massive need for that. not just in the library archives world, but in the greater business universe as well. And actually, and Dana, I would put anyone who has an interest in archives in touch with Jackie Esposito, who used to be the university archivist. Jackie is a wonderful, wonderful human being, and is always happy to talk to students.
Fabulous, thank you. And Danielle is adding information into the chat for students that are on this. You can copy and paste the links that are in there. Great questions so far in the chat. I actually have my list over here and I'm avoiding it right now. So what difficulties, if any, do you find educating the public via museums in an ever increasing online world? And there's one very similar to that. How is technology changing the way museums operate? So maybe in the same type of area. So find educating the public via museums in an ever increasing online world, and how is technology impacting museums?
I think I can talk about that one a little bit, at least for, from the Palmer's perspective. With the move to the new museum, there was a lot of, reworking on the branding and, the how the museum is shown to the public and stuff like that. And a big part of that was kind of overhauling our website and, just trying to make that more accessible and trying to get the collection to be accessible online, so people can look up certain, works that we have, and especially works that we don't have on view, because we have, you know, the vast majority of our collection, as with a lot of museums, is not shown. It's, stuff that we just have in storage. And so I think, a big thing for that was us, changing the certain like database that we use to, archive our collection, and then also, updating our website to, work in conjunction with that, I think was a really big one and was really helpful, for making our collection in the museum more accessible. And then at least in the, like actually in the gallery space, way of trying to do that and adding technology. In the new museum currently, we have, I think, in almost every gallery, we have them in a few galleries, but there will be an iPad there that, people can click on, and it will talk about a specific artwork or a few specific artworks and give you more information and show videos about it. And, I think things like that have definitely become more, more common for us to try and make things more accessible and present more information to people as easily as possible.
That's so exciting. Yeah, looking forward to visiting. Casey, did you have something to add?
Yeah, and I think too, especially as the world's becoming even more kind of ingrained within social media platforms and digital media in general, I think it's also really important for museums also to consider maybe who their audience is, if they have a particular audience, and how to attract them. I know with the memorial, they were trying to figure out what social media platforms were kind of best and where they could be. And interestingly enough, one of, if not our most popular platform, was actually TikTok. Neuengamme was actually the first German concentration camp memorial on TikTok, which has actually become a trend now, which also is a little bit diametrically opposed, because there are a lot of platforms as well that sometimes spread hate speech or Holocaust denial and distortion. So sometimes it's also going on those sites as well and being able kind of to combat some of these issues, where social media is great with being able to spread information and knowledge. But on the same hand, there are also issues, and sometimes knowledge isn't necessarily being spread accurately or spread appropriately. So I think especially with museums is trying to figure out within this digital landscape, where do they belong? Where can their message kind of persist? And also how much energy, as Ken said, some museums have a staff of 3 people. Do they want to have an active TikTok account? Is that something that people on the staff are able to do and able to maintain? So I think it's a question of being able to engage kind of with an audience or with the greater public, but also knowing that there might be some limitations with that, with staffing or kind of other accessibility problems.
No, I think Casey's exactly right there, because it's better to not do it than do it poorly or infrequently. With social media. And no, Joe hit it on the head too. That it's bringing collections online is a huge huge effort most sites are working to accomplish at this point. Thankfully, I'm not involved with it because it is in kind of contracting hell right now. But we are looking at completely changing out our collections management system, in Carlisle, which is um, right now, I think is 5 different systems kind of duct taped together, none of which is working terribly well, and none of which is displaying real well online, which obviously reflects poorly on the center. And it's all of this goes back to we're all competing for attention. The public's attention. To get them to come out, to get them to interact in some shape or form. And when you're sitting, in in the director's chair or just even as staff someplace, it's important to remember that your competition, for the public's attention is not the museum down the street. It's anything that the public can do with their leisure time, and you're competing with sports, movies, um, theater, anything that they can spend their free time and free money on, is what your competition is. So it's important to look kind of holistically, at the environment, and sometimes steal what some of those other things are doing. You see if it's usable, for what you're trying to accomplish. Um, I will say just if some folks want to see what you know, uh, some big sites are doing in terms of bringing collections online. National World War II Museum down in New Orleans has done a great job, particularly with their oral history collection. Imperial War Museum over in the UK as well, with most of their object collection now is all online, and searchable. You know, so if you want to lose yourself for a couple hours down in the internet hole, there are places that you can go.
Love it, love it. Those are all 3 great comments. I wanted to mention that we have the Mattson Museum of Anthropology opening next semester in the new Susan Welch Liberal Arts Building. So that's going to be an exciting time next semester to have that building operating, and then we're going to see this improved and bigger space for the museum. So we're excited about that. I have a question. What was the most valuable resource at Penn State, or something you found very helpful when you were at Penn State?
At least for me, I think, obviously the internship program specifically at the Palmer was, one of the biggest things for me. I kind of applied for it out on a whim. Just, I got an email about it and thought maybe I'd try it out and see what happens. And then, everything just kind of fell into place from there. And, if I didn't do that, I don't know if I would have, gone into this career path and started working in a museum. But, I'm very grateful for that and grateful that I was able to get that opportunity through Penn State. And, um, I, if anything, I'd say I almost regret that I didn't take advantage of more of the resources that I had as a student. And especially now that I've been here and been working for the university and still seeing everything else that I kind of missed as a student, you know I do regret it a little bit. So I definitely think you should take full advantage of any resource, any free thing that the university can offer you. Definitely take advantage of that while you're still a student.
Yeah, and I would say for me too, a big thing was also kind of financial aid and funding opportunities at Penn State. Because as Ken mentioned previously, the museum world and industry is still trying to catch up, or at least have more discussions about paid internships. But almost all of my internships were unpaid. I had some exceptions where I got stipends from the Department of History at Penn State. But some of those the opportunities, I was still able to do them even though they were unpaid, because I was able to get funding through the Career Enrichment Network, which, huge plug for them for also hosting this event today. But there are funds through there, the Paterno Fellows Program, the Schreier's Honors College. There's also, I wasn't able actually to utilize this because it was towards the end of my career, but they're also within the Student Engagement Network. There's actually now a Max and Shirley Kogan Museum Experiments Fund, which is actually designed to help students either visit museums, intern at museums, or be able to attend conferences related to museums as well. So Penn State, only with time, is kind of having more resources and funding opportunities. So I definitely think if there's kind of a fear there of just not being able to take a part of one of these experiences because finances might be in the way, I think it's really important to be able to reach out and have some of these resources because they really can make it possible.
Yeah, as someone who did not have any of these things back in the 90s, yes, go avail yourself of everything, that is available. My most valuable resource, was my, academic advisor. The history department did not have an internship program in 1997. Carol Reardon, my advisor, literally picked up the phone and started calling her friends, to find a spot for me. So, you know, do, it doesn't necessarily have to be, your department assigned advisor. Like Carol was not, I just went to her and literally said, hey, your focus area is where I want to be. Are you willing to be my advisor? And we've stayed in touch in the intervening 20 something years, to the point where she actually runs a program for us in Carlisle, so we're actually now peers. But the other thing that folks can take advantage of is, and I'll put on my hat as the former chairman of the Campus Museum Consortium, is there is a multitude of museums on the University Park campus that address almost every academic area that museums generally cover, at least in in a broad sweep. If you are a natural history person, go to the Earth and Mineral Sciences Museum and Art Gallery. They would love to hear from you. They have a newly refurbished space in Dike Building. Go engage with them. Like Casey, Claire Milner is a good friend of mine. Like Matson is going to be a great place with the new space. As an anthropologist, Palmer, obviously has always been the heavy hitter on campus. If you're looking for more broad history, it pains me to say that the All Sports Museum is the only place on campus that addresses university history. Which is why, at least when I was there, we were trying to kind of broaden the scope of the exhibits that we were doing. But if you're into agricultural stuff, you can go out to Pasto. Rita out there would would love to hear from you. So not necessarily a direct career, kind of career center thing, but there's a lot of museums on campus, all of whom, with the exception of Palmer, have a staff of 3 or less and could use some help.
That was so enriching, like to hear from all three of you. All the suggestions that you had were fantastic. And Danielle has posted in the chat, enrichment funding. That was one thing that Casey mentioned. Our office does sponsor that from generous alumni that donate money for you to have outside the classroom experiences. So please take a look at that. Come and see us as career coaches and talk about that if you have more questions. We do have 2 more questions in the chat. And so one of them is, what made you decide to work in museums as opposed to other career paths? Was there a particular museum that you fell in love with or changed your life?
Yeah, I would say, it's always, museums have always been something, that I've had a love for. And the first museum experience I remember having was Air and Space in DC when I was 5. So to be able to go behind the scenes with them and their construction manager, about 18 months ago while they have literally gutted the building to see what they're doing. I'm like, this is super cool. Like, this is my first museum experience, and now you're turning it into something really state of the art in what is effectively going to be $1 billion renovation. Um, it's, in terms of not going down other career paths, I had originally thought about doing the museum certificate and stuff essentially on the side. I had enjoyed what I had done in my undergraduate internships. I had been thinking about going straight through, to teach at the college level. I come from an academic family, um, but getting into grad school, we had kind of a toxic department at Delaware with some of the faculty that turned me off to it. But I remember seeing the article in the Chronicle of Higher Education, it saying, and this was probably like spring 1999, that back then, for every college level teaching position at that point in time, there were a minimum of 200 applications. I'm like, so that means I have, if all things being equal, I have a 0.5% chance of, getting a job, any time out. I think that reality plus what I did in my graduate internship and some of my assistantships at UD kind of sealed the deal. And I very much, I get to write and publish on my schedule, not with kind of an academic tenure track gun to my head to do that. And it's just much more hands-on history.
Love it. Thank you. Casey or Joe?
Yeah, Ken saying about it being hands-on history is something that really resonates with me, and I think also explains my love and passion for museums. Because I've always thought museums were really cool, kind of being this preserving body almost of a certain history or culture, or just as an institution that had a lot of knowledge in it. But it wasn't until my internship in the summer of 2021 with the Jewish Cultural Historical Museum in Curacao that I really got to see it more as kind of a living, working institution, because part of my internship was developing a temporary exhibition that focused on different Jewish families and their family histories within Curaçao's history. And that it was something that I was able to kind of apply more of my ethnography background in anthropology. And I was able to go into the community. I was able to do interviews. I was able to do these highlights and spotlights on these various families and how they connected with the broader history of the island. That was something that I was really interested in, that it wasn't necessarily just, oh, this museum has all the knowledge or all the information, but just the engagement of the community and being able to see how that information grows with community involvement, and also being able to better represent the community as well, because there weren't all of the stories within the museum. We were still going into the community and gathering them. And I think that's one thing, especially I'm more towards the side of education and kind of outreach. That's more of my passion when it comes to museums. That's something that I really want to seek, is working more with communities and making sure that they feel represented and seen, and that they're also a part of the conversation, because it's not just an institution that's kind of rigid and exists. It's very much impacted by the community itself, and it's very much a community organization, no matter what type of museum it is.
Yes. Joe, anything to add?
Yeah, I've ever since I was a kid, I mean, I've always been really interested in history, loved history and art. And um, my uncle actually, he had experience in museums as like a curator and had worked in a few. So he, would usually take me to museums a lot. And I think the first museum I was ever at was, I'm from like around Scranton, PA. So there's one in Scranton called the Everhart Museum. Um, and, that's kind of just a museum that kind of has like, a little bit of everything in it, but it was just so cool, getting to see there. And, I think he took me to the Natural History Museum in New York City once, and I loved it there too. And but I never really, decided that I was going to work in museums at all. And, I knew that I really enjoyed history and, art, and, was hoping maybe I can do something with that. I was kind of thinking maybe I would, go into either teaching or high school, or, try and get higher degrees and, be a professor or something for history. But I kind of fell in love with art history here at school, and started getting more into that side of it. Just the way that it connected. One thing that I already loved was art, and then another thing I already loved history. Um, but and then getting that internship at the Palmer, I was kind of just, it kind of just fell into my lap. And uh, the second I was there and got to see, everything behind the scenes and, at least with my position as a preparator, like actually, being the one to handle the artwork, being the one to, put that artwork on the walls and getting the exhibit ready and like, especially like working in storage is like one of my favorite things is just working back there and seeing everything that we have in storage. So it was, once I started doing that as an intern, I was, I kind of started to fall for it and just, was like, this is something that I think I would, want to do for the future. And it ended up working out that way that I was able to do that. So.
Love it. The storage room, that's really exciting, right? And museums. Not everybody likes storage rooms, but I'm sure the museum storage rooms so much. We're gonna have one more question here, and we'll try to answer this one pretty quickly as we're getting down to time. So maybe one of you, if you want to take this, what role do you think museums play in shaping cultural understanding?
I guess I can take this one. I mean, talking a little bit about like what my last response, being able to see kind of institutions like museums as kind of being able to represent cultures, but I think also being able to interact as well. Because I think that it depends also the type of museum that you're talking about, especially if it's focused on a specific culture or a specific topic that might deal with that. I think definitely people that are going there can learn more about the culture, but I think kind of in the reverse as well, as sometimes institutions haven't necessarily always been representing the voices though of those community members necessarily, that I think that's very much still a huge discussion and conversation within kind of the museum industry as well, is talking about that, a lot of these stories necessarily haven't been represented from their perspective yet, and they're kind of still working on them, or even kind of decolonizing certain objects, or looking at different objects also, quite frankly, from different perspectives as well, that they might be kind of a very famous artwork, but there might be some connotation of colonialism or imperialism. So I think not only is it looking kind of cultural understanding of what's being studied, but also how people might have studied that in the past, and having more conversations with peoples of those groups or underrepresented people and getting them more involved in this as well. So I think that's a very layered discussion to have that we can't necessarily wrap up now, but I think kind of being able to learn, but also learn from what's historically been taught as well.
Fantastic, thank you. So we are getting close to 5, so if it's okay, I'd like to go just hit one of each one of you, and just, what last piece of advice do you give to students today that are on this call, that you think will help them in their careers? Joe, do you want to start with that?
Sure. Um, I think probably one of my biggest advice or biggest piece of advice would just be to, don't be afraid to just try and figure things out. Like it's okay if you aren't sure what you're going to do, or if you're trying something and then you don't really like that and you have to, try and switch to something else. I know it's probably very scary to think about that, but it's not the end of the world. And if anything, it'll give you more experience and more understanding and more perspective for when you finally do find that thing that you want to do.
Thank you. Casey or Ken?
Yeah, I think just kind of going off of Joe, being able to kind of ask questions. I really encourage you, especially I mentioned kind of towards the beginning of this, is just going on LinkedIn and maybe identifying museums that you're interested in, and maybe reaching out if there are any Penn State alums that are working there, or maybe just someone that has an interesting job position, and just be able to kind of email them. Or I did a lot of cold kind of invites and kind of messages on LinkedIn, and they don't always respond, but I think that's a good way just to put yourself out there and to learn more, because I think as you're gaining more information, it'll only help you decide more of what you want to do. And I know that can be a little bit daunting, but I highly recommend just kind of building your network in whatever way you can, because a lot of people are really interested in talking with students and they really want to help you. So don't be afraid. People might not respond to you, but I think that's a great first step.
Thank you. And Ken.
Yeah, I would, just to extend off what Casey said is, just a kind of interview, tip. Don't be afraid if you have applied for a job someplace, that you're particularly interested. Don't be afraid to give them a call and ask for an informational interview, and just go see the site, talk to the people there. My second job, when I went down to Baltimore with USS Constellation, I had the benefit that a friend of mine from grad school was an educator there. She tipped me that a job, the curatorial job, was coming open. I drove down from Long Island, took a day off because they were having an event that night at a bar on Pratt Street where, I don't know, like 10% of the take was going to the ship or something like that. But I got to know everybody, that night. So when I walked into the interview, I knew everyone there. We'd already had a good time together. They knew that I was a culture fit because that's as important as qualifications. But don't be afraid, to make those calls. More broadly, I've been doing this almost 25 years at this point. It is an extremely rewarding field. I have done things that I never, thought I would do, whether, it was restoring a 150-year-old ship, to, having staff who were directing tanks driving around back in September at our annual Army Expo in Carlisle. I will warn you, the early years can be rough. The money is not great starting out. It's just a reality of the universe. I always advise folks to look at state and federal jobs. They tend to pay better, at least right now. And I'm not to get too political, as long as things don't get too crazy the next couple of years. Few organizations in the museum world pay better than the federal government. So get to know USA Jobs, get to know the application. It can be Park Service, it can be military, it can be almost every branch of the federal government has a history component or their own museum, even ones you don't necessarily think would. I applied for a job 2 years ago, I think at CDC. They have a museum, in DC. Who knew? But just go in, with your eyes wide open, and know that your first job probably is not going to be at the Smithsonian or Science and Industry in Chicago. That you may be mowing lawns and unplugging toilets.
Thank you, Ken. Oh, good.
No, it's just like my son and his friends, volunteered all summer with Mary Sorensen over at Center County Historical Society, and they will tell you that they have never done more weeding and painting than they did this past summer. So.
I love it. This was so extremely valuable from all three of you. Such great perspectives and insights and tips for students. Thank you so much for joining us for this hour. The Old Main bells did ring a couple of minutes ago, so I apologize for holding you a couple of minutes, but it was just so awesome. And thank you so much. For the students that are on the call, Danielle has thrown it in the chat as well. We are career coaches. We can meet with you. You can come into our office here in Sparks Building or set up virtual appointments through Nittany Lion Careers, and we can help talk more about this. But we are so thankful to have Casey and Ken and Joe, who are working in this directly in these fields, to speak to you today. So thank you, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.